Hi there, welcome to This Explainer. If you're a beginner trying to wrap your head around the inner workings of public relations, you're in exactly the right place. Today, we're going to uncover the hidden strategy behind story selection, specifically how top PR pros actually decide which story to pitch first to the media. It's a real game changer.
Okay, let's just dive right in. When you're just starting out in PR, there's this super common myth you've got to overcome. Basically, the myth is that crafting the absolute perfect pitch, agonizing over every single comma, finding the perfect adjective, obsessing over that catchy subject line, is the hardest part of the gig. But the reality? The reality is actually deciding what to pitch in the first place. Because think about it, most brands don't just have one single story sitting around. They have multiple angles, company updates, and ideas, and they're all competing for attention at the exact same time. It's like a giant traffic jam of information.
And that brings us to a really fundamental rule of PR. Sequencing is greater than execution. So what does it actually mean in practice? Well, if you have a flawlessly executed, beautifully written pitch, but it's simply the wrong story for the moment, it's going to fail. It just will. On the flip side, if you have, say, just a decent pitch, nothing crazy, but it features the right story sent at the exact right time, that is going to get picked up. The true magic of PR, the whole shebang, really happens in the sequence. So, moving into section 1, the 5 factors of story prioritization. How do we decide what goes out first? We're going to explore 5 key pillars to answer that. We've got urgency, angle, media landscape, audience, and narrative over time. These are the strategic levers professionals pull every single day when deciding what goes out today and, well, what waits until tomorrow. All right, our first factor is urgency. Is the story time sensitive? Listen, if a piece of news is tied to a hard deadline, a fast-moving trend, or some breaking development, it absolutely must skip right to the front of the line. Think about a major product release or a huge funding announcement. If you don't get these out immediately before the moment passes, the story completely loses its relevance. Journalists will just move on to the next shiny thing. Time waits for no pitch. Factor 2 is the strength of the story angle. Think about it. Pitching, hey, we launched a new feature, that's a purely internal update. It's weak, and frankly, it's a little boring to an outsider. But if you frame it as, this feature solves a massive growing industry problem, suddenly you have a clear, powerful hook. Not all stories are created equal, right? PR pros are constantly assessing whether a story has emotional relevance or some deeper industry insight. The stronger and more relevant the angle, the higher it gets pushed up that priority list. Let's move to factor 3, fit with the media landscape. It is incredibly easy to get tunnel vision on your brand's internal plans, but external conversations shape PR just as much. Your timing depends heavily on what journalists are actually covering right now. For example, if AI regulation is massively trending in the media and your company has a relevant insight on that exact topic, you push that story forward. Even if it's not your biggest internal announcement, you gotta ride the wave of the external conversation. Factor 4 is audience. Knowing exactly who a story is for will heavily dictate its sequencing. A highly technical product update naturally has a niche focus, right? It belongs in industry-specific publications. But a massive business funding announcement, that has a much broader focus, perfect for top-tier business press. Your audience alignment often determines which story goes out first, depending on which specific audience you actually need to activate right in this moment. Finally, we have factor 5, narrative. This is where PR really becomes a long game. Sometimes the most strategic thing you can possibly do is just wait. It's that deliberate choice to hold back some stories to support future coverage. PR isn't about random, isolated blasts of information. No way. It's about strategically ordering announcements to build long-term credibility. For example, you might actually hold a thought leadership piece until after a product launch, just so it reinforces your new authority rather than competing with your own launch news. Makes sense, right? All right, let's see this in practice. Section 2, sequencing in action. We're going to look at what I call the 3-story dilemma. Okay, imagine you represent a brand, and suddenly you have a product launch, major funding news, and a glowing customer success story, all ready at once. Here is your aha moment for building optimal momentum. Month 1, you lead with the funding announcement. Why? Well, because funding creates instant market authority. Next, you roll out the product launch. Because you already established that financial credibility, the media is going to take your product much more seriously. And then later, you follow up with the customer success story, which basically acts as this undeniable supporting proof that your new product actually works out in the wild. The absolutely crucial point here is that the order changes the impact completely.
If you had just thrown all three of those announcements at the media on the exact same day, like throwing spaghetti at a wall and hoping something sticks, they literally would have stepped all over each other. But by structuring these three elements properly, you transform a scattered, chaotic brand presence into this unstoppable wave of momentum. And that brings us to a major pitfall I definitely need to warn you about. Pitching everything at once is the absolute biggest mistake you can make. Honestly, it just creates noise and confusion. Journalists receiving multiple, unrelated pitches from your brand in a short window, they'll likely just ignore you. On the flip side, strategic prioritization creates clarity and focus. It keeps your narrative super clean and digestible. So, how do you actually make the final call? Well, behind the scenes, PR pros are constantly asking themselves questions to weigh first impressions against long-term positioning. They ask things like, what creates the strongest first impression? Or what strengthens our credibility the fastest? Ultimately, it really comes down to this one idea. It is way less about what do we have and much more about what matters most right now. As we wrap up this explainer, I really want you to remember this core takeaway. Mastering this prioritization process takes PR away from being just random guesswork, and it turns it into a clear, strategic art form. Actually, scratch that. It's a science and an art. PR is, at its absolute heart, structured storytelling over time. So I'm going to leave you with a thought to challenge you today. How will you sequence your next brand story? Think about it. Take the 5 factors we discussed today, look at the announcements you're working on right now, and figure out your optimal sequence. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I really hope this helps you build some absolutely incredible momentum for your brand.